好，Hello，各位书友，大家早上好，欢迎大家来到佳作书局的直播间收看，并且参与今天的策展人讲座第7讲。那么我们现在距离讲座开始呢，还有大概5分钟的时间，照例来给大家来看一看，就是这一套中国国家博物馆国际博物馆学译丛，以及今天我手中这本，今天讲座内容围绕的这本《策展人：自然历史博物馆的幕后故事》。那么也提醒一下大家，可以点击一下左上角的这个红色购物袋按钮，那么系统会抽取一位幸运书友，获得一本就是屏幕上这个策展人自然历史博物馆的幕后故事。那不知道大家有没有看过一部电影叫做《博物馆奇妙夜》啊？就是在夜里那些化石都会活过来啊，有没有幻想过在自然历史博物馆里面生活和工作？那这本就是策展人呢，就是芝加哥菲尔德自然历史博物馆的策展人兰斯格兰德博士的亲身经历。来看一下，这个是位于密西根湖畔的菲尔德自然历史博物馆 （Field Museum）。它是建立于1906年，是美国3大自然历史博物馆之一，也是世界上最大的自然历史博物馆之一。一共是拥有2700万件标本。那其中一个镇馆之宝呢，就是一条座长13米、高4米的这个霸王龙化石，叫做苏。这个也是目前世界上现存最大、最完整的恐龙化石。一会儿兰斯也会来介绍它的来历。好，那在兰斯格兰德作为高级策展人领导博物馆的研究和收藏部门的时间里面，他好像意识到，鲜少有人了解自然历史博物馆的策展人的工作内容，以及他们每天都在进行着的这个以研究和记录我们星球的生物学、地质学以及人类文化的工作。那这一个认知的差距呢，成为了他写作这本书的初衷所以他选择了在这本书里面以这种平时易懂以及不乏幽默的叙述方式，为大家认识和理解自然历史博物馆的收藏及其策展工作开了一个小小的窗口。好，那我手上这本由中国国家博物馆，也就是国博与东方出版中心合作出版。这一本书以及这套书都是这样子，然后它是在这个装帧上做了圆脊的设计，可以看到是一个圆脊的设计，然后书脊还做了这种植绒布的包背设计，所以不仅可以方便平摊，翻阅起来手感也非常的好那大家可以看到这里的序号写的是05。就是第1季的中国国家博物馆国际博物馆学译丛一共是10种，内容会涉及博物馆学理论基础，策展与设计、管理运营以及藏品管理与保护等等各种方面。那这本书呢，就是格兰德博士会从一个非常个人化的背景出发从他作为一个学生成长为高级的策展人的学习经历讲起。分享他在芝加哥菲尔德自然历史博物馆从事科研以及这个策展的亲身经历，以及可以看到就是画面里面就是这种图片都有显示他在全世界进行的这种探险的有趣故事然后其中还穿插了介绍了秩序分类学这种非常专业的科学方法，以及他在里面也对策展人愈发丰富的工作经验进行了一定的反思。所以大家不仅能在这本书里面看到，比如说策展人徒手抓鳄鱼的故事也有讲述了博物馆里面行政管理也好、展览策划也好等等各种流程，以及涉及到文物返还以及收藏伦理和保管等等这种悬而未决的挑战和问题。好，那这本书可能是这个系列译丛当中比较偏实践以及可读性非常强的一本书。我记得在这个前面这个前言里面，这个总序就是原中国国家博物馆馆长王春法，也就是这套译丛的主编在这个总序里面说到，就是博物馆学是一门综合的学科。那这套译丛呢，也要想去顺应着去兼顾这种系统性、探索性和开放性，尝试去兼收并蓄的分享世界博物馆学的研究动态，希望为中国博物馆学学科基础奠定个基础。那么除了这本书以外，我也把其他书给大家稍微看一下。 好，比如说第一册是这个解读博物馆知情者说，还有这个博物馆的沉思，关于百科全书式博物馆的争论，作者是这个 James Kuno。第三册是博物馆学基础不断演进的知识体系，我们也请到了这2位老师，但是具体时间还没有定，大家可以期待一下我们之后的几场讲座。第4场是策展伦理，让保罗·马蒂农，这场讲座即将在9月份。好，那前4册可能是偏理论的一个4本书，然后第6本是这个展览设计导论。下一场讲座就是8月12号，是这个作者要来分享关于这本书的内容。好，那后面几本呢是这个第7册是策展指南，一本蛮厚的书。第8册实操问题，什么成就了优秀展览？第9册数字时代的博物馆，新媒体与新中介，可能涉及到一些跟技术层面的前沿问题。第10册是文物保护与修复，材料与方法。我们其实这个月上个月才结束了一个关于艺术品修复的一场讲座。好，那么针对这套一丛呢，我们已经邀请到了其中4场的原作者。那么我再重点介绍一下，就是下面一场讲座8月12号，也就是这个第6本展览设计导论。那这个作者菲利普休斯 Philippus 也要做客这个佳作书局的直播间来介绍展览的叙事与设计，以及他作为一个策展事务所的一个主理人，他前后后经手了上百个策展项目。所以如果有对这个展览策展的实操问题感兴趣的书友，那欢迎您点击下方的弹窗进行预约。好，以及欢迎感兴趣的书友点击下方的红色购物袋了解购买今天这本策展人自然历史博物馆的幕后故事。也欢迎今天大家在讲座当中随时在评论区分享您的评论和跟作者本人交流的问题。那佳作书局除了策展人讲座之外，还有美术史新书分享、新知学者讲座、摄影主题讲座和工作坊等等系列的文化活动。希望您可以点击一下左上角的这个白色头像，在简介的下方有一行蓝色的小字，写着这个视频号佳作书局，然后您点击进去就能看到我们的关注页面和我们近期所有的讲座预约，方便您接受更多的书籍信息和活动资讯。好，不好意思，时间稍微长了一些，那我们现在回到这个自然历史博物馆，再次欢迎各位书友来到佳作书局的直播间收看第7讲。我们的策展人讲座已经是第7讲了，希望大家跟我们一起持续关注书的艺术和关于艺术的书籍，一起听这个作家、学者、艺术家和策展人在这里分享他们的创作和研究。那如我刚才所介绍呢，这一套国际博物馆学译丛第1季一共是10种，那是由中国国家博物馆，也就是国博与东方出版中心合作出版。那今天这本策展人呢是其中的第5本，可能与我们往常在这个直播间里面所能见到的这个艺术博物馆和艺术品的这个收藏的机构会有所区别。因为 Field Museum 作为这个自然历史博物馆，它的收藏和研究集中在了这个自然史和自然探索的领域。我们今天刚刚开始之前还在开玩笑说，这可能是小动物浓度最高的一集。我们今天也非常荣幸的请来了这本书的作者，也就是芝加哥菲尔德自然历史博物馆的策展人兰斯·格兰德博士。他已经在这里任职了41年的时间，长期的从事鱼类古生物学和进化生物学的研究。Hi, Dr. Grande. Yeah, we're so glad that you're here at Paragon Book Gallery today. Yep, would you like to say hi to our audience?
Well, hi, I'm very glad to be here. It's a new experience for me, remote halfway across the world.
Yeah, thank you. It is like a new technique after COVID time.
It is.
Yep. Yeah, I'll introduce the translator and pass it to you soon. 好， 那么今天的讲座也很高兴能得到中国国家博物馆国博的支持，所以我们也邀请来了这本书的2位译者，一个是中国国家博物馆副研究员王灿老师，以及中国国家博物馆考古院科技考古研究所所长和副研究馆员高华光老师。那王老师和高老师也可以分别开个麦，跟书友们打个招呼吗？
大家好，很高兴在这里能一起分享这本书的相关内容。
高老师。
大家好，我是高huaguang啊，一会儿跟大家分享一下我在这方面的一些共同的经历吧。
好的，谢谢。刚才一会儿也会2位老师也会带来这本书以及有关于科技考古项目的一些分享。但是在此之前呢，我们先要来看一看，就是从20世纪这种单纯的罗列标本和这种手工艺品的堆放，到现在在这种新博物馆理念下面去实现寓教于乐。那这种自然历史博物馆的形式和策展理念发生了怎样的变化？那么兰斯格兰德博士可谓是这场历史的亲历者。那我们接下来就有请格兰德博士来分享一下自然历史博物馆的策展人他们是谁，以及他们平时都做些什么。Hi, Dr. Grande. Sorry I took some time to introduce.
It's
Now
quite all right.
Thank you. Great.
So shall I begin?
Yep, definitely. Time was yours.
Well, today I'd like to talk to you all about a book I wrote featuring natural history museum curators and their importance and contributions to human society. Being a research curator is a wonderful career that I feel very privileged to have had over the years. And I hope you get as much enjoyment out of reading the book as I had in writing it. This book contains many of my personal experiences as a curator and a scientist at one of the world's largest natural history museums. So on this first slide, you can see the cover of the book as it was first published in English in 2017 by University of Chicago Press. In 2019, it was translated into Korean and it was published in Korea there. And finally, in 2024, the Chinese version was released. I've been a curator at the Field Museum of Chicago for 43 years. Before that, I was a PhD student at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. These decades of experience have given me a deep insight into the importance of curators in natural museums and also in the importance of natural history museums in general. Curators are charged with enhancing scientific credibility of their institutions, and this is through the scientific papers and research projects they do. This is through their field expeditions, and it's through their contributions to exhibits that the museums put up to show the public. Curators are also charged with training the next generation of scientists who are interested in the natural sciences, and also in the general public, trying to, talk to the scientifically literate interests among them. And finally, curators are charged with safeguarding these huge collections of natural history and cultural history objects for the world's scientists to use. And this is a major thing. The collections curators build are critical documentation of natural and cultural history that they maintain in perpetuity for study by the world's current and future scientists. Here you can see one small room in the collection of museum. The Field Museum collection, for example, includes over 40 million specimens, of which less than 0.01% are used for exhibition. The rest are used by scientists from all over the world. We're like a lending library of actual specimens for people to include in their research projects. For 9 of my years as a curator, I was also senior vice president, head of research and collections in the museum. And this experience taught me how few people really understand the full palette of what curators are and do. This moved me to become an advocate for curatorial profession and for natural history museums in general. Writing this book was highly personal for me, and I hope its intimate tone engages readers about curators and their contributions to society. Here you see some of my great field assistants in one of my field trips here on the left. And we depend so much on our staff and our volunteers. Half of these people here are volunteers. It's the kind of work that attracts volunteers because it is of interest to many people. And we work some of the most interesting fossil sites, nature sites, and archaeological sites in the world. And this contributes to our popularity as an institution. My scientific education began in Minnesota, in the Midwest United States, with a gift from a friend and encouragement from a crafty university professor. My college career began at the University of Minnesota as an economics major, working on a business degree. But my friend Eric Radke brought me back a souvenir from southwestern Wyoming, where he had been on vacation. And it was this beautifully preserved fossil fish that you see on the left here, 52 million years old, but it didn't take any kind of imagination to see it as a living organism. I was so impressed by the beautiful preservation of this fossil that I took it to the paleontology professor at the university, and that was Robert Sloan, who you see on the right here. I asked him if he would identify the piece for me. And so we came into his office and he looked at it for a while, and then he looked up at me and he said, "No, I won't identify it for you. But if you take my course in paleontology, you will be able to identify it." I was hooked. What could I say to that? So I took his course and I was so engaged by it that after I was done, I switched my major. I switched it to paleontology and stayed there, and eventually got a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in paleontology and evolutionary biology there. My master's thesis was on a site, on the same site where that souvenir came from my friend Hans. And this master's thesis was eventually published as a book by the Geological Survey of Wyoming. And this opened a lot of doors for me. Colin Patterson at the British Museum of Natural History had been a reviewer of this, and he was impressed with it enough where he contacted his colleagues in New York and said that they should offer me a scholarship. And this got me into a PhD program there at the American Museum, where I could study with the curators Don Rosen and Gareth Nelson in the ichthyology department, or the fish department. Don Rosen taught me much about anatomy, and this is Don Rosen and me in 1982 when I was a bit younger looking fellow. And one of the things he taught me, besides all about living fishes, was a variety of techniques and how to study them. And he taught me the clearing and staining technique, which I used all through my career. It involves taking small fishes or other small vertebrates and first putting them in a red dye that is absorbed only by bone, called alcian, alizarin red, and then putting them in a special blue dye that's only absorbed by cartilage, called alcium blue. And then putting the specimens through a series of enzymes that make the soft tissue, whether it's skin, muscle, or whatever, it makes it completely clear. And so you have these beautiful little specimens. See, these two fishes here are only 2 inches long, and this is a little chick. But these are complete skeletons now that are small enough where you could put them under a microscope to study. And this is a very useful technique for studying comparative anatomy. And in order to look at fossil fishes, I needed to know living fishes, because the fossils did not have a separate evolutionary history from the living organisms. They all developed as one. Now, Gary Nelson was my other advisor there, and he taught me about the so-called cladistic revolution in evolutionary biology and philosophy. And this was actually a tradition where instead of looking at ladders of progress, we started to look at relationships among things. Cladistics changed the way that evolutionary scientists did all of their analytical research. Rather than looking for these theoretical ancestors based on these isolated fossils and just overall similarity, cladistics used only special similarities that statistically were determined to be uniquely derived for specific groups. And they use these to build hypothetical tree patterns of relationship. And this is how most modern evolutionary biologists work today. They don't specify specific ancestors, even though we knew they were there somewhere. It's just that we don't have the ability to specify exact ancestors. We only have the ability to look at relationships of groups and then theorize that there were ancestors that gave rise to these groups. Now, this was a radical shift in evolutionary philosophy. This philosophical revolution did not come easy, but it was based largely in museums. The controversy between cladists and traditional evolutionary systematists was intense in the 1970s and 1980s. At the American Museum, this affected professional scientists as well as students. In fact, sometimes the students had to be careful because they had to take qualifying exams that had professors from both camps. And so you had to be really impressive to one camp in case the other camp was not going to give you as great a marks. This intense controversy, the experience of it made me a better scientist because it taught me just how controversial some areas of science can be. And that's how progress gets made in science. So my years as a graduate student paid off. In 1983, I was hired by the Field Museum in Chicago as an assistant curator. There I expanded my field program in this Fossil Lake locality in Wyoming, where Hans had gotten that fossil fish that he brought back for me had started my interest there. On the left, you can see the butte where this occurs. It's in the high mountain desert of Wyoming, and it's an 18-inch thick unit that's near the top of that butte. And on the right-hand side, you can see me with a bulldozer operator, and we're shoveling off all the overburden to get down to this thin 18-inch layer that is just packed full of fossils, all from this same 52-million-year-old community. The site became one of the most important fossil localities in North America. It's an entire 52-million-year-old community locked in stone, and it's one of the earliest comprehensive looks at Earth's recovery after the extinction event at the end of the Cretaceous that eliminated 80% of all species on Earth. Over the years, I built the world's finest collection of fossils from this locality at the Field Museum. Many are in an exhibit I helped design that's seen by over 1 million visitors per year there. I published 2 books and many articles on this amazing fossil locality over the years, including that publication of my thesis I told you about before, which is you can see on the left here, which has gone through 2 editions and 6 printings. And then more recently, a book just on the specific locality, which I call The Lost World of Fossil Lake. In the 1980s, I worked with the National Park Service to design a national monument at the site, highlighting the attributes of it. You can see the building that we built at the left here. And on the right and the inside, I helped acquire the fossils to build the exhibit there. And part of it was involved casts of fossils that we had at the Field Museum, and they were installed at the national park so people could see some of the treasures that come out of this locality. And there you see a crocodile that we found maybe 20 some years ago. And this was a cast that we made and donated to the national park. I also developed an international field course there through which I've trained more than 300 prospective scientists. It's called Stones and Bones. And this is the Stones and Bones class of 2019, which was the 16th consecutive year I had taught this course. This course was developed by the University of Chicago and me to train advanced placement high schools and undergraduate students from around the world for them to enter university-level paleontology programs. Each student spends 2 weeks in my class at the Field Museum, where we look at museum science and I talk about fieldwork and other aspects of being a curator. And then we go out to Wyoming and camp for 2 weeks on the Fossil Butte site, where the crew actually excavates these beautiful fossils for 2 weeks. At the end of the course, each student gets 8 college credits, which will transfer to any college of their choice. Over the years, I had a number of Stones and Bones students from Beijing, as well as from other countries around the world. Several Stones and Bones graduates have become professional paleontologists. And here we have the Stones and Bones class of 2022. But Fossil Lake was only part of my curatorial development. In 1988, I expanded my research further with my colleague Willie Bemis from Cornell University. Together, our goal was to research the evolutionary tree for ray-finned fishes, which constitute most living fishes today. Willie and I shared a passion for fish anatomy and for evolutionary biology. And over a period of 15 years, we visited 12 countries and 13 states for our research. This is Willie and I in Japan in 1995, studying the fossil fish collection that they had in there. Our work, we had to be creative with our work. It also included working with living fishes when we needed skeletons of living fishes for comparison. So we got the idea to participate in the Alabama Deep Sea Fishing Rodeo. This is one of the world's largest fishing contests in the Gulf of Mexico, which includes more than 3,000 fishing boats every year. And they have all these different contests for largest sea bass, largest swordfish, largest this, largest that. So Willie and I got the idea that we would set up a booth there and offer a $200 prize to the most unusual fish. And in order to enter the contest, the fisherman had to donate his fish's skeleton to science. And in return, we would fillet the fish meat off and give it back to the fisherman, but we would keep the skeleton for the museum. In this way, we got lots of huge skeletons for the collection. Here you can see we're doing a dissection of a swordfish on a pickup truck using machetes on the left. And on the right, there's a record-breaking grouper that we got. Its skeleton, too, is now residing at the Field Museum in Chicago. Willie and I shared many adventures, publishing many books and papers, which helped build both of our careers. Here's a few examples. On the left, this is a large monograph that we did on fossil and living paddlefishes. This turned into a large monograph, which started the monograph series for the Journal of Vertebrate Paleontology. On the far right, you'll see another monograph we did, a 700-page monograph on fossil and living bowfin fishes. That's what we did. We did these large monographs that combined studies of fossil and living fishes that were all related to each other. These were well received. We won prizes for these, both from the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology and by the American Society of Ichthyologists and Herpetologists. We also did textbooks, and this textbook was ours, Functional Anatomy of the Vertebrates, which is a comparative anatomy book that's used by many universities around the country. One of the most impressive scientists who I collaborated with during my career was Meiman Chang in Beijing. Like me, her specialty was with fossil fishes. She received her PhD from Stockholm University. In 1983, she became the first woman to head the IVPP in Beijing, and she received numerous awards and honorary degrees from around the world during her career. These included honorary doctorates from the University of Chicago in Illinois and from the American Museum of Natural History in New York, as well as many distinguished awards from around the world. Meiman also spent time in Chicago, where she received an honorary doctorate in 2011. She and I collaborated on a project involving some fossil fishes endemic to both China and Western North America, showing an interesting trans-Pacific relationship. Here's one of our papers, Together Redescription of Perclupia chetongensis, which was a fish from the lower Cretaceous of southeastern China. Meiman is an absolutely amazing person with a remarkable life story that really needs to be told in detail. She was truly an honor to work with. There were other things besides research that shaped my curatorial career, including my involvement with donors and iconic specimen acquisitions. One prime example is my involvement with Sue, the Tyrannosaurus rex, which showed me the impact that even a single fossil can have. This was the largest, most complete skeleton of Tyrannosaurus rex found. It was found on August 11th, 1990, by amateur fossil collector Susan Hendrickson, who was working with Black Hills Institute, or BHI. She discovered Sue in the side of a butte on Native American land in South Dakota, starting a monumental chain of events. And here you can see her standing beside the seam where the Sioux bones were located. BHI, the commercial fossil company, bought the rights to excavate the skeleton from a Native American South Dakota landowner. And for 2 years, BHI and Sioux excavated the skeleton, finding it to be amazingly complete. But then things blew up and became very chaotic. The landowner, thinking he had been underpaid for the skeleton, reported Black Hills Institute to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, complaining that he had been swindled. In response, the government reacted with force, much to the displeasure of the local population, who protested this reaction loudly. And here you can see, May 14th, 1992, in South Dakota, 30 National Guard and 18 federal agents from the FBI, Bureau of Indian Affairs, and the National Park Service seized Sue from Black Hills Institute, claiming ownership for the U.S. government. This was not a popular thing with the local residents. And you can see in the top, there were protests, people with signs saying, "Save Sue, honk for Sue." And there were people that laid down in front of the government trucks trying to prevent them from leaving. It was a really bad situation. It's initiated by a chief federal attorney for South Dakota who was newly appointed and vying for political office. This became the longest, most expensive federal case in South Dakota history. It hit hundreds of newspapers across the United States and resulted in 3 major books. It also resulted in an award-winning movie called Dinosaur 13. I was subpoenaed to South Dakota 3 times, along with curators from across the country. The attorney suspected collusion between Black Hills and natural history museums for some reason. It was a frighteningly impressive experience and a mistaken overreach by the federal attorney. In the end, the government lost its case with Sue. The attorney did not get his appointment that he wanted. And the government returned Sue to the landowner, who then put it up for auction at Sotheby's in New York. This all taught me a lot about complications to specimens that are these iconic pieces in the world today. Field Museum got donors, huge donations from McDonald's and Disney. and were ultimately able to make the winning bid for the Sioux skeleton with the help of major donors. And then we got it and brought it to Chicago. Then the real work began. It took 30 people over 2 years to prepare and mount the Sioux skeleton. Half of it was done in Chicago at the Field Museum, and the other half was done at Disney World in Florida as part of the agreement with Disney for putting up half of the money. Here you can see, for example, two of the preparators working on the skull in one of the labs. And on the right-hand side, you can see a New York group that we hired from the American Museum to help us mount the actual skeleton. This was a long process with close public scrutiny. On the left, here's Susan Hendrickson and I admiring the newly prepared foot of Sue in February 1999. Shortly after that, Steven Spielberg, the famous producer of Jurassic Park movies, came to the museum to view the foot, and he too was quite impressed. The opening day for Sue on May 17th, 2000 drew more than 10,000 people. The opening week drew 68,000 people, from students to President Clinton and a couple of senators. And here you see a picture I took of them admiring the skeleton as it was unveiled. Sue, the dinosaur, increased museum attendance by millions of visitors. It brought in new major donations to the museum. It generated over 200 scientific publications. It became an icon for the museum and for the city of Chicago itself. In the meantime, I was promoted to an administrative role in the museum, vice president. My role as senior vice president gave me an even broader appreciation for museum curatorial work. I became familiar with the diversity of curatorial research, from tropical rainforests of the Philippines to the ice sheets of Antarctica. It was a true global program. And as you can see, there's a map of the world with these little orange dots all over it. Each orange dot represents a field site for one of the 27 curators of the Field Museum in 2012. So you can see our field research covered the globe. I also became familiar with the iconic historic curators from the museum's past, like Carl Patterson Schmidt, also known as K.P. Schmidt. He was curator of herpetology from 1922 to 1955, shown on the left here. He was also a pioneer in the use of television for educational outreach, and he produced some of the first television episodes using Field Museum specimens for natural history lectures. KP was a fearless collector for the museum. Here on the left, you see a 1923 photo from a field expedition he made in Central America. You can see all the crocodiles and alligators in the water. It was reported that he jumped overboard to grab an alligator that he wanted to collect for the museum, and he wrestled it into the boat. And the people that were with him were so impressed with that when they came back to the museum, they taxidermied the specimen and put it on exhibit. And that's the specimen you see on the right here that is on exhibit to this day at the museum. Can you imagine somebody wrestling something with that many teeth in the mouth? That's pretty amazing. He was a daring person. In 1957, he examined a live boomslang snake that was sent to the museum for identification from one of the local zoos. Unfortunately, during that examination, it bit him in the thumb. Now, he was thinking that he was bit in the thumb, so what can that do? But he, as a scientist, thought, I'm going to start to record what happens hourly after being bit here, because it had never been recorded before. So he started a diary, and every hour he put down what kind of symptoms he was experiencing. And unfortunately, after 2 days, he finally died from the venom. But it just shows sometimes the length that people go to with their interest in natural history. Another legendary curator from the museum's past is his first curator, 1894, named Franz Boas. He's known as the father of American anthropology, and you can see his picture on the left here. He founded the Field Museum's Human Remains collection, one of the many thousands of different collections we have. This one contains over 3,000 human skeletons. This has turned out to be a complicated deal today because now we have repatriation as a consideration. Some of these skeletons that were collected in the late 19th century were collected improperly. And so one of the responsibilities that all museums have is to return items that have been irresponsibly collected from the past back to their homes of origin. And again, over the last century, museums have not collected the same way in this manner. Right now, everything is much more ethically collected. Boas disproved the early 20th century belief that head anatomy showed intellectual superiority of Western Europeans. That, believe it or not, that was a theory in the early 20th century. And in a book called Race by Thomas Gossett, Gossett wrote, "It's possible that Boas did more to combat race prejudice than any other person in history for that period." Boas was a remarkable person, and his students included such notable scientists such as Margaret Mead, a famous curator at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, and a champion of women's rights. And here you see one of her books on the right. Margaret Mead, as a curator, was a rarity because this profession is one that's dominated by men. Here you see a picture of Margaret Mead and standing in front of the American Museum on the right here. The imbalance between male and female in the curatorial profession still exists today. When I came to the Field Museum in 1983, there were no women curators on staff. It's improved considerably since, but there are still far fewer women than men in the curatorial professions in the United States. This imbalance is partly due to the scarcity of women applicants. One curatorial search I led had 111 PhD applicants, of which only 6 were women. The imbalance is also due to the difficulty for museums to retain top women curators once they get them. This is a problem I came to appreciate while I was serving as vice president. We had several extremely great women curators at the Field Museum, but they would be hired away from us by larger institutions with more resources and money. So it was a challenge. We need more women in the curatorial profession. Another important aspect of curatorial work involves environmental conservation. Curator Larry Haney has worked 40 years to save the rainforest of the Philippines. He's one of my close colleagues at the Field Museum, and he has helped establish a dozen national preserves in the Philippines. At the top photo, you can see Larry working with students in the Philippines, and at the bottom, you can see one of the indigenous population members that he works with, because some of these remote areas requires him to work with indigenous populations to be able to understand the areas that are in need of conservation. Another curator in conservation is Rudiger Bieler, who helps restore coral reefs. This is important because today 90% of Florida's barrier reef has been destroyed by boats and pollution. And so there are these giantly massive dead coral heads. And what Rudiger does is he raises coral polyps in these large tanks. And he goes out to the coral heads and drills holes in them. And then he reseeds these 400-year-old coral heads with live coral plugs that are grown in his lab. And eventually that restored part of the reef returns to life again, and all the fishes and other organisms come back. This is a very promising program, and hopefully it's going to help restore much more of these dead reefs. Australia will need to be doing this pretty soon too, because they're losing much of the barrier reef, partly due to raising temperatures. Curator Peter Crane is another curator who helped create an enormous conservation program at the museum, which is called ECHO. And here you see on the left of Debbie Moskovitz, who we appointed as head of that program. On the right, you can see a map of South Dakota. ECHO has helped preserve 30 million acres in the upper Amazon region. And you can see on this map all these areas highlighted in light green. In the 21st century, the role of curators and natural history museums continues to evolve. There's a growing need today for curatorial help in the fight against science illiteracy. For example, science literacy in the 21st century has fallen in the United States. The US ranking in science literacy among industrialized countries has been tracked by PISA organization for many years. In the year 2000, the US ranked 15th among industrialized countries. In the year 2009, that dropped to the 23rd, and in 2015, it dropped to the 24th. This needs to be reversed. Museum curators are ideally positioned to tackle science illiteracy with the public. They are on the front lines of specimen-based scientific research. They work on popular subjects that can reach the public through exhibits, dinosaurs, mummies, all kinds of things. And they teach students through collaboration with local universities. As curators, we are hired as adjunct professors to actually teach through universities as part of our job. So the takeaway message of my book is curators form the intellectual heart of natural history museums, and they provide a vital, important service to society. They play a key role in both the research side and the applied side of science. They also help train the next generation of scientists. And here you see two more of our curators who work in Africa. And on the left, you have Bruce Patterson with one of his colleagues there. So today I can only give you a few brief highlights covered in the curator's book, but I hope you'll enjoy reading the book for more details. Writing the book to broad audiences is something I began later in my career after years of specialized research. I've been doing a number of books to broader audiences now, and I can do that at this point in my career. Early in their scientific careers, curators have to focus on specific areas of expertise. This is what they need to build their reputation. Later in their careers, many curators, like myself, feel compelled to reach out to broader audiences and replay their experiences that show the value of science and of natural history museums to society. I plan to keep on doing this in the future. So I thank you all for listening today, and I hope to answer some of your questions later.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Grande, for your sharing. It is really amazing to see the collection room, like the big collection rooms, and how interdisciplinary the work that you're doing, and also it is very interesting to know like the government field museum and the Sotheby's and Disney's were all in the same, like in one story. Wow. That is really amazing. Yep, I'll come back to you for Q&A after the sharing from the translators. Thank you.
Sure.
好， 那么，谢谢策展人格兰德博士为我们介绍了他成为以及作为策展人的各种经历。那么我记得就是在这本书里面，这个总序里面提到，这个博物馆相关的知识体系大概可以分为3类。那么一类是关于文物藏品的学问，叫做文物学；那么一类是关于历史文化研究，被归在这个历史学的范畴。那么最后一类是研究这个博物馆的管理，那包括珍藏文物保护、展览、教育和传播以及安全等等等等。那么总体上面这3部分构成了呃现代博物馆的知识体系的主体的部分。但是在这一段之后，就是紧接着就补充的说到这个自然历史博物馆和艺术博物馆会另当别论。但是其实我们今天通过格兰德博士的分享以及在这本书当中的内容，就是能看到的是，这3个主体非常紧密的结合在了一起，组成他日常的工作，比如说从这个进行科研到与政府去打交道。好，那我们接下来可以请就是王老师从这个译者的角度再介绍一下这本书，以及分享一下您在翻译的工作过程当中的想法吗？王灿老师，您可以分享您的 PPT。
哎，梦然，我现在这个主持人不允许在此会议进行共享。
稍等一下。
嗯。
您现在尝试一下呢？可以了。
大家好，感谢佳作书局的邀请，很荣幸听到 Lance Grande 教授带来的精彩讲座。与 Lance Grande 教授虽素未谋面，但通过对策展人自然历史博物馆的幕后故事这本书的翻译，感觉已经认识很久。我今天的对这本书的分享呢，主要包括2个方面的内容。一方面，我将每一章节选取代表性的照片，结合起来简要介绍一下各个章节的内容。另一方面，我主要想谈一下这本书给我的感受和启发。这本书的叙事脉络非常清晰，一共有前言和后面14个章节。在前言中，作者以时间为轴线，介绍了自然历史博物馆的起源和发展，以及策展人的职责。左侧这张照片呢，是第1章节的相关内容。这张照片是作者在大学时代偶然得到的一份礼物，也就是咱们那个书的封面这个鱼化石标本。它改变了作者的人生轨迹，使他从商学院转入了科学领域。他早年所经历的秩序分类学兴起过程中的观念冲突，让他体会到科学是在动态的斗争中前行。中间这张照片是菲尔德博物馆现在的一个鸟瞰图。在第2章中，作者讲述了应聘为菲尔德博物馆策展人的经历，而这个成功呢，很大程度上得益于第3章，他在怀俄明州找到自己的野外考察点 FBM。右侧这张照片就是他在FBM 开采化石的场景。整个1到3章主要讲述的是引导作者选择策展人这个职业的人和事。后面的4到8章讲述了作者成为策展人过程中影响他的人和事。比如第4章，这张左侧这张照片呢是古鱼类学之父薛里，作者讲述与他一起开采墨西哥采石场的故事。第5章呢，就是涉及右边照片的这个生物学教授威利，作者讲述与他的合作。 那这张图的左侧这张照片是菲尔德博物馆的标志性展品恐龙酥。在第6章中，主要讲述恐龙酥从发现到引起纷争，最后入藏菲尔德博物馆的系列故事。第7章主要讲述了菲尔德博物馆各有研究专长的同事们在不同领域所做的工作。他们有蘑菇专家、第一专家、鸟类学家、陨石学家、海洋生物学家、人类学家和考古学家等。我选取的这张照片，中间这张照片呢，是一位植物学策展人，他为了获取当地特有的植物权限，参加牛仔竞技比赛，虽然受到重伤，但赢得了当地人的尊重和接纳，后来也被允许收集他想要的植物。第8章是已经去世的策展人 KP 为科学献身的事迹。右侧这张照片是他被非洲树蛇咬伤后写的一页日志，后来他毒发身亡，所以这个也被称为死亡日记。这5个章节也可以看作是自然历史博物馆策展人在全球范围内构建多样藏品的典范。第9章讲述作者担任副馆长所开展的行政管理工作。左侧这张照片是菲尔德博物馆主厅的4个角落安放的4座缪斯女神雕像，它们预示着该博物馆的核心使命，即科学、记录、研究和知识传播。作者担任行政职务，主要负责的就是帮助博物馆来行使这些使命。第10章讲述他策划格兰杰宝石馆项目的幕后种种，不仅有展会购买宝石的故事，还有探矿的经历，并且呢，还介绍了宝石馆的一些展品、展览的捐赠者，以及这个项目别出心裁的设计。然后右侧这张照片呢，是宝石馆代表性的一件展品。第11至13章主要探讨了策展人和自然历史博物馆工作中的一些问题。左侧这张照片是美国人类学之父博尔斯，他开启了博物馆人类遗骸收藏工作。在第11章中讲述了人类遗骸具有重要的科学价值，如提供对人类生理学、人类信仰体系等直接可供观察的记录。但是人类遗骸藏品的管理也面临了道德挑战，涉及了文物返还、伦理和法律问题。中间这张照片是菲尔德博物馆的重要展品——查沃食人狮的标本。在第12章中，从猎杀食人狮的惊心动魄的往事到现在，科学家更多的是关注狮子对生态系统的重要性。时过境迁，人类与自然的关系也在发生变化，进而引出第13章自然历史博物馆策展人和藏品在生态保护系统中的重要作用。右侧这张照片是在策展人的帮助下，在菲律宾建立的一个雨林保护区。那最后一章指出了自然历史博物馆面临的挑战，比如如何维持庞大的藏品，如何解决研究人员不断增加的成本问题。博物馆可通过加强机构间的合作来应对这些问题。作者尤为关注，现在就刚刚也在讲座里也日益提到的，就是美国日益严重的科学文盲现象。作者认为策展人是解决这一问题的理想人选，鼓励策展人重视公众参与的科普活动。我翻译这本书呢是具有偶然性，接到该任务时心中忐忑不安，这主要源于我对自然科学的陌生。自然科学是探究现象背后的奥秘，给我的感觉是深邃茫远的，无边无际的星空，绵延广阔的自然。做了翻译后，突然觉出自然科学的可亲。回过头细细体味，我觉得这主要得益于3个方面。首先，这本书的叙事方式不刻板、不说教，它没有摆出一副高高在上的姿态，让人只能仰望。书中俯拾皆是的幽默总能让人会心一笑，这种平易近人的学术态度本身也正是对作者大力提倡的公众科学一词的回应。 所以这本书既有学术研究的严谨性，也有科普读物的可读性和趣味性。这里想简单说一下全书高频出现的公众科学这一理念citizen science， 这是以大众来源为基础进行标本和数据等资源的收集，鼓励公众参与科学过程。那公众科学的方法，一方面可以争取到公众的帮助，充分调动大众的力量，克服科研机构人力资源有限的问题；另一方面，可以增强公众对于科学研究重要性的认识。那比如说博物馆的志愿者服务，博物馆接受大学的研究生培养、实习项目以及与外部机构的合作，既有应对的灵活性，又有着眼于长期的可持续性。这同样是公众科学理念在实践中的具体运作。这对于国内策展人、研究机构以及进一步完善志愿者服务体系，我相信是能有所借鉴和启发的。其次，这本书的内容丰富有趣，这源自于作者及其同事在不同文化背景下险象环生的亲身经历。可以看到，优秀的自然历史博物馆的策展人不但是对专业领域有深厚研究的科学家，还是科学知识的传播者，是博物馆馆藏的扩充者，也是永远在路上的探索者。再次，这本书具有深刻的人文关怀，它鼓励在科学领域不断挑战教条和权威，破除偏见和迷信。它对于博物馆如何寻求科学价值与法律风险、伦理道德的平衡以及环境保护等关乎人类命运的重要问题，有着面向长远的思考。作者本人也是这样身体力行的，他通过写作唤醒公众对于自然和文化的好奇，教授课程鼓励学生，激发探索和发现的热情，培养新一代潜在的科学家。以前每次逛自然历史博物馆，看看标本，凑个热闹。通过翻译这本书，隔着展柜的玻璃，豁然明白藏品不是从天而降，他们是策展人竭尽所能不断发现与建构的成果。从展品中能够体会到策展人的良苦用心与辛勤付出，其背后许多感人至深的故事，让人不由对科学精神肃然起敬。自然科学同我们脚下踩的这片土地一样真实可感，它切切实实关乎我们生存的处境，不仅是回首过去，追溯到宇宙诞生之初，立足现在人类与自然生态的相互影响，更是面向未来我们如何预见困境，改善环境，来寻求人类的发展。近些天我重读这本书，仍觉得呢，像在聆听经验丰富的长者在娓娓道来，非常朴实亲切，也觉得干货满满。我相信拿起这本书的读者定能爱不释手，各取所需，有所思考，有所裨益。说不定它会成为一颗热爱科学的种子，悄然发芽，成为阅尽人世后不一样的转身回望，成为认识自我、了解世界、理解存在的一次凝神屏息。谢谢大家。
谢谢王老师对这本书的介绍这本书后面其实还收录了一篇王老师的译后记非常的精炼又很感人的总结到了这个科学是如何通过这个争议不断的在发展然后这个策展人作为研究者去认识世界的探索永远是连接着过去的时空以及关于未来的一些问题，比如说环境保护和这个博物馆设计的更新的未来。那么另外一位译者老师高老师，可否基于您在这个科技考古研究所的项目，分享一些您的经历呢？您可以分享您的 PPT。
大家好，默然能听见吗？
可以听到。
哦，我以为静音了，没静音。等会儿啊，共享屏幕。大家好，刚才 Grande 博士这本书的作者，还有我的共同的翻译老师王看老师呢，对这本书做了一个介绍。我呢就结合我本人的一个在博物馆的 在博物馆的工作介绍一下我这个就是工作跟这本书相关的一些内容吧，然后希望大家对这个博物馆的工作有一个更立体的了解。现在博物馆已经热到了一个发烫的程度，就是尤其是我们这个暑期哈，我们都能看到现在是博物馆，各大博物馆是一票难求，呃，我也有很多朋友都问我说，这个你们是不是在假期的时候、节假日的时候是尤其是不是忙啊？是不是要经常去接待观众啊什么的？可能就很多与这个博物馆热相矛盾的一个问题，就是大家对博物馆展品可能就是期望了解比较多，但是对这个博物馆幕后的一个工作内容就缺乏了解这本书呢，策展人这个自然历史博物馆幕后的故事实际上就讲述了一下这个自然历史博物馆的幕后的一些故事。其中呢也有我们大家都耳熟能详的一些故事，比如说这个卡尔帕特森史密特这个策展人他那个被毒蛇咬了之后没有立即去就医，而是每天都记录一下他这个被毒蛇咬了之后的症状，直到去世，然后为这个就是科学的一个进展留下了一些记录，然后但是献出了自己的一个生命。这些故事大家可能都耳熟能详，但是很多细节可能都不知道，但在这本书里边都有一些详细的一些记录。另外还有这个查沃的食人狮，这两头狮子也是非常出名的两头狮子，就是在东非的那个乌干达铁路修建的时候吃了好多人，然后最后被打死，然后放到了菲尔德博物馆作为一个菲尔德博物馆的一个展品这件事呢也被拍成了电影。然后广为流传，可能大家都知道除了这些就大家都知道的故事以外呢，还有很多的一些博物馆幕后的一些故事，大家都是鲜为人知的，嗯，都可以通过这本书呢去就是对博物馆的幕后工作有一个更深的一个了解吧。呃，同样，我们在国家博物馆，这是我本人的一些工作。然后我本人是国际一个4星级潜水员，以前的时候也在海底寻找一些水下沉船，也有的时候到沙漠或者是戈壁滩去做考古调查、考古发掘我本人还是我们是科技考古，然后我的专业方向是一个遥感考古，也就通过无人机卫星等这种科技手段来探索一些考古的知识然后有的时候在边疆地区或者是其他一些人类不能到达的一些地区去放飞无人机和卫星来收集一些考古的一些知识。这是这本书里边介绍的，其中有一个洞穴策展人珍妮特沃伊特以及这个策展人吕迪格比勒尔，他们在海底潜到一些海底的深处去那个保护这种海底生态还有珊瑚礁，呃在这些海底当中就是这也是我们人类难以到达的一些区域我们很难就是在我们现实日常生活中得到这些画面吧。然后我们同样作为水下考古工作者，有的时候也会潜到海底的深处去那个寻找这些海底沉船。比如说这是在西沙群岛西沙群岛的一些华光礁的沉船和沉船上的出水的藏品这也有很多一些有趣的故事。比如说我们这本书的作者介绍书里边儿说，作者本人呢有一个呃被海底的压力给压扁的一个纪念品，一直放在书架上。我们在海底下潜完水之后呢，有的时候到了岸上也会去高压氧舱，做一个压力的一个恢复，呃呃，还有我们在海底下有的时候，比如说看到的血液的颜色不是红色的，是绿色的因为那个我们海水把那个太阳光里的红波吸收掉了，只剩绿色的，这都是就是一些很神奇的一些体验嘛。同样我们在海底发掘的这些海底沉船上的这些瓷器都拿到了博物馆，然后我们在国家博物馆也开展过一个水下考古的成果展。嗯， 另外呢，在这本书里边作者曾经就是在这个化石湖这个区域呢，因为就是在地图上发现这个化石都是存在一个7000英尺海拔在7000英尺的附近的这个化石分布的一个规律就是根据这个规律来绘制了这个化石的分布地图，然后通过这个化石地图来寻找一个埋藏化石的一些潜在的一些化石区域。这也是我们一个工作的一个内容的一部分，因为我们遥感考古也是通过这种空间信息技术，然后来获取一些人类的一些遗址的可能的分布范围。比如说，这是在山西，这是就是比如说古人类遗址它有可能大部分是分布在海拔高程差不多是290到600米的范围之内，然后它的坡度呢有可能是1到3度是分布的是最多的，然后坡向是朝南或者东南西南还有距离水系的一些距离有多少米，然后根据这不同的因素呢，我们可以绘制一个山西这一块区域各种古人类遗址的分布的范围，就是这种绿色、深绿色是我们古人类遗址最有可能分布的范围，就通过这个地图来寻找我们古人类的遗址的分布这也是这本书里边提到的一些野外考察的一些方法另外我们遥感考古也除了这种画，除了这种书里边提到的这种寻找古人类遗址的方法以外呢，我们因为我们那个卫星或者是航天飞机的传感器，它的不同波段看到的是我们人类肉眼看不到的东西。比如说，在这个航天飞机上，1981年的时候，这个雷达波段的图像通过扫描这个撒哈拉沙漠，然后在沙漠的底下，深2米的地方发现了一些古河道和一些湖盆，然后后来科学家去在这个地方去发掘呢，就发现了很多古人类的遗址，也获取了很多古人类的遗存的石器陶器等等的一些东西。这是我们通过也是通过雷达波段，然后来探测这个掩埋在我们中国的沙漠底下的一些长城的分布。另外呢，我们这本人做的一个二里头遗址，因为二里头遗址中间这一块呢属于二里头遗址的宫殿区域，但是这所有的遗址区域呢都是被小麦覆盖的，通过人的肉眼是看不出宫殿区域在哪儿的，但是我们通过卫星的一个热红外波段，然后经过一些数据处理呢，就可以很明显的把这个宫殿区域的范围和形状在这个卫星图像上显示出来。这一块儿是一个齐长城的一个调查，这条直线呢，就是在山东，他们如果是做田野考古的调查的话，因为这是大山上嘛，可能很多地方是我们人类很难到达的一些地方，不好上，所以说就没办法，只能通过2个线段连成一块儿，就只能大略的认为这是齐长城它的一个路线走向图。但是我们通过高光谱遥感呢，就可以通过它的齐长城土壤里的成分等各种不同的一些数据，然后探测到齐长城的分布。然后这下边这个曲线呢，就是齐长城通过卫星遥感的技术手段探测到的齐长城的分布。然后我们也到达了2个相对可以容易到达的区域去进行了验证。这是我们通过卫星和无人机的一个基载激光雷达的一个方法，然后这个能在南方这种密林的区域就很有用了。他们可以把这个古代这个文化遗迹的地表上的茂密的一些植被直接过滤掉，然后就能看到植被以下所覆盖的一些遗迹的分布。这是吴哥地表，吴哥因为在南方嘛，它那个地表的植被特别茂盛，所以说我们很难看到植被下边的遗迹到底是如何是分布的。但是通过基载激光雷达呢，滤掉这种上面的植被，我们就可以很清楚的看到植被下面这种遗迹的分布范围。这个也是通过基载激光雷达在墨西哥发现的一个玛雅遗址。然后这个玛雅遗址，其实在这一块儿，就普通我们传统的田野考古已经在这儿工作了25年，都没有发现这一块儿，玛雅遗址。但通过基载激光雷达把上面植被滤掉之后呢，我们就很容易的发现了这个玛雅遗址的存在。 这下面这2幅图是我们中国湖北的一个密林底下覆盖的一个墓葬，也是通过地带激光雷达我们能够看到这个墓葬的形状和范围。还有，除了我们通过遥感去在野外寻找我们的古人类遗址以外呢，遥感的方法其实也可以去解释一些就是我们可以平时看不到的一些内容。比如说，我们有一回在新疆的考古调查，然后在新疆野外调查的时候呢，到了新疆的一个巴音布鲁克这个大草原上，有一个一直被认为是一个墓葬的一个遗址。然后，所有的以前的考古工作者都认为是墓葬，但是我们通过把无人机升到空中，然后往下观测的时候呢，就发现这个墓葬周围的这个形状是形成向外辐射的一个太阳辐射的一个呃形状。所以说经过资料对比分析，发现这不是墓葬，而是一个太阳祭坛。然后这也是我们遥感对这种古遗址的一个不同的认识。另外就是也借用一个我们总书记的话说，这个博物馆是一个大学校我也仅仅是通过个人的一个工作介绍了一些博物馆里边一些一部分工作内容吧。我们科技考古所也包括一些体质人类学、冶金考古还有那个碳氮同位素等不同的研究方向都可以看到我们古代的人类吃过什么，得了什么疾病还有他们使用的一些青铜器是从哪儿来的，与周围的遗址有什么交流等等。其实我们博物馆里边的工作内容特别丰富吧。我只是通过我个人的一些工作，然后希望大家能对我们博物馆幕后的一些工作有一个大体上的了解谢谢。
谢谢高老师做的拓展以及这个遥感考古技术层面的各种解读那我们接下来马上就是会进入到问答的环节如果各位书友有关于日常讲座以及自然历史相关的问题想向作者老师提问呢，欢迎在评论区告诉我您的问题。感兴趣的书友呢，也请您点击下方的这个红色购物袋那个按钮来查看这一套译丛以及欢迎大家点击我们左上角的头像，关注我们的公众号和视频号，以方便您接受更多的书籍信息和活动资讯或者也欢迎大家进入我们的社群，我们新开了一个频道，之后可能会更多的去分享关于这个主题的佳作好书也可以就是有更多的时间给大家翻一翻这一套丛书的详细内容。那么入群方式呢，就请大家详见弹幕区，我们这个客服会把账号发在我们的弹幕的平台上。好，那我们接下来就进入到问答的环节，欢迎各位书友继续在评论区分享您的问题。我看到了已经积累了一些问题，那我现在就向格兰德博士提问。Hi, Mr. Grande. Do you mind opening up the microphone, please? Yep. Oh, yeah. Right now, I think it worked. 好的，那第一个问题呢是关于就是自然历史博物馆的展陈，就是有一位书友和另外一位书友都问到了这个展陈的问题我把它结合在一起，一个是问这个展示标本的展柜好像都会进行这种栩栩如生的这种展示，请问这个是从什么时候开始的？以及现在感觉能看到越来越多的屏幕出现在展厅里面，想问一下格兰德博士对于这个数字化的看法。Well, so the first question would be about like the layout of the exhibition. So it seems that from a certain period of time that the specimen closet seems to have like a lot more like vivid presentation or they tends to have like more introduction or illustration about those skeletons instead of like the old school like the layout in the Oxford Museum of Natural History, for example. Like they seems like they have like a hole of skeletons or fossils. Yep. So one of our audience would like to know like when did this happen and like how did this happen?
So if I understand the question, when did museums start putting more into explanations about the specimens rather than just putting them out there with no explanation. I think that's something that most major museums today do, and I think that was something that happened in the 20th century. I mean, some museums go back farther than that, and so they had different goals. Nowadays, education is a major goal of major museums. That's not to say there still aren't some small museums that are say less robust in their supportive materials, but all the major museums, at least that I'm aware of, are very focused on educating the public as one of their missions. And so they're not just a store showing pretty things. They're trying to actually educate people and use these artifacts as tools to do that.
Great. Thank you. I think there's another question related to this, but it's more like down to like the current trend. Is that it seems that there is like more screens than ever currently in the exhibition hall, and they would like to know like what is like your opinion on this trend of digitalized and animation.
Yeah, sometimes I think it's very useful, especially because it makes the exhibits interactive with the general public. So, for example, a lot of these digitized sections are actually question and answer booths, or people can indicate what their interests are, and the videos can actually give further explanation to questions they have. I mean, it's still a developing technology, and I'm sure it's going to change more and more as artificial intelligence gets incorporated more into these things as time goes on. Museums though will always be dependent on the real thing in the end. I mean, if we explain and exhibit pieces, but museums are vested in showing real things, not just casts or videos or pictures, because it's the real things that anchor all of this in some sort of empirical base or reality.
Thank you. 好，那我简单的总结一下，针对第一个就是那个展示柜好像都会进行叙述声的展示，他觉得可能是这个是21世纪之后，所有的这个博物馆的一个主要的倾向，就是他们倾向于不把这些标本啊这些化石当成珍奇柜里面的一种漂亮东西的展示，而是希望它作为教具去实现他们的教育功能。然后针对第二个就是关于这个数字化的问题，那么老师认为就是，这个技术肯定还是非常有用的，因为它的这个互动性会非常的好，但是这个依然是一个蛮值得期待的发展中的技术。但是归根结底，就是博物馆或者是自然历史博物馆，它的本质上面还是要从实物去出发，去实物去做研究和进一步的展示。好，那我们现在进行到下面一个问题，一位叫做天爱的书友想请问，现在有很多自然博物馆都会开展公共科学项目，比如说召集本地居民一起对本地的物种进行调查和保护，想请问就是菲尔德博物馆有哪些比较好的项目吗？可不可以介绍一下？Well, so the second question would be also related to like public participation, but I think it's on another level. So one of our audience would like to know that like currently there's a lot of natural museums have those public participation in those scientific projects, for example, like calling like native residents to do like research and protection towards like native species or kind of stuff. Are there any like cases or projects in the Field Museum that is related to this kind of work?
We have a huge volunteer program where we try and enlist the general public in doing all kinds of different things. For example, in the paleontology department, we have probably 20 or 30 volunteer fossil preparators. In the conservation division, we have probably hundreds of people interested in helping with conservation efforts, both locally and volunteering as field operatives going out into the field. I guess the volunteer program is part of the life's blood of a major museum because, we hire, or we have maybe 660 permanent employees at the Field Museum, but we probably have 3,000 or 4,000 volunteers. And so it's a huge supplement to our staffing and our ability to get things done.
Got it. I'm just curious, like what kind of projects maybe like they are involving in, like for example, like collecting or doing some research or also like archiving kind of stuff or
Yes. Oh, yeah. We have volunteers that help with collection management. Collection management, that's a whole different area of people at the museum. Generally our support staff, the curators are focused on research. Collection managers are focused on managing these huge collections, and both the research curators and the collection managers are able to have staffs of volunteers that help. It takes a lot of people to catalog all the specimens that we have. As I said, we have an estimated 40 million specimens at the Field Museum, and the majority of those are cataloged. We have catalog numbers, and then we have data files that exist that are pegged to those catalog numbers, and it's a lot of work to responsibly maintain these collections, and it takes a lot of volunteer help in every aspect of what we do.
Thank you. 好，那针对这个问题啊，格兰德博士的回答是，就是除了他们当然就是在他们自己的工作人员之外，还有当地的居民，以及还有3000到4000的注册的志愿者，会帮助他们去进行一些科研的辅助，以及更重要的是关于那些巨大的藏品的管理和分类。如果这位书友感兴趣的话，也可以尝试去申请一下Field Museum 的这个志愿者的团队。好，那下面一个问题是有关于合作，就是一位书友想请问与其他策展人的其他领域的策展人的合作是否是这个专业和行业的常态？Okay, so the next question would be on collaboration. I think yeah, because you mentioned that like you have like a lot of friends in this realm, and you also like knows very well like how their works going on, like have friends like researching mushrooms or researching other animals, and one of our audience would like to know like whether this kind of like collaboration out of like your own like research on the fish is the kind of like a usual thing in this realm, or as your in your work of as a curator. Yeah.
You mean establishing collaboratory projects? That I think that's something that all the scientific researchers do. I mean, I should clarify too that the staffing in the museum is complex. Although I said there are about 660 employees, only about 30 of those are research curators. And but then of course they work with collection managers and all kinds of other staff members and volunteers. And this whole group somehow works together efficiently. The other kind of connections between the researchers and, say, collaborators outside of the museum, like mine with Willie or the one I had with Miman Chang. These are natural things that happen too. I mean, each research curator is expected to develop these relationships with institutions and experts outside of their own institution, and that expands their ability to do, broad research. Collaboration is an important part of the work in the museum research, for sure.
Got it. Yeah, but like just like personal curiosity, do you like usually like conduct field research or field work with, like with your colleague, they're also like conducting, for example, like research on mushrooms, on plants, and also on, yeah, I'm like wondering, are there any like collaborations
Oh,
on
sure.
that?
Well, so as I say, we have about 30 curators at the museum, and each curator has its own specialty. So yeah, we do have a fungi curator. We do have a curator for mammals, a curator for birds, a curator for fishes, and I mean there are all these different specialties. And sometimes even within the museum, we work together. We collaborate in different fields. I mean, I work with a lot of people outside of ichthyology myself, because the locality that I work in, as I explained, it's an entire community that's locked in stone. It's a 52 million year old community that it has beautifully preserved fishes, but it also has beautifully preserved plants and insects and birds. It's the best fossil bird locality in North America, in fact, which was something I wasn't expecting to find early on. They're complete bird skeletons with feathers attached. It's very unusual. So I have to work with collaborators outside of my specific field. I mean, I work with ornithologists to work on the birds. The plants, excuse me, I simply channel the plants to specialists in those areas. But yeah, I feel part of my responsibility is to make sure that all of the things that we collect get worked on by somebody. And if it's not me, I try to find somebody else out there who is an expert in that field and get them interested.
Got it. Thank you. 好，那我
Sure.
简单总结一下，就是这个与其他策展人的合作，他们是菲尔德自然历史博物馆，据老师介绍是有大概30多位不同专业的，比如说包括哺乳动物或者鸟类以及植物，然后他们每次去外出采集样本的时候，都就是想尽量的保证他们采集过来的样本是有人可以研究，并且得到很好的展示的，所以当然会涉及到这个专业当中非常interdisciplinary 或者说我们非常跨界的合作。好，那我们接下来下一个问题是有关于学术跟大众性的一个问题，就是有一位叫做方的书友想请问，作者在撰写博物馆科普类著作时，如何平衡学术与大众之间的矛盾？简言之，如何让大众看懂学术的语言？Well, so the next question will be on your experience on your publications, because you mentioned that you're used to be like writers or authors for those academic essays, and then you move on to like you're writing books for more like general public, and also maybe for kids. So like one of our audience would like to know, like, how do you balance the difficulties and the difference between like the different styles of writing them? Because actually like your book is really like accessible in the Mondes series, and definitely it is like it's really adorable, that give us like kind of like a stepstone for everything. Yeah, we would like to hear like whether you are like yeah, like your experience when you're first like writing those books for a very different audience, maybe.
Well, I've always had an interest in writing, even before I went into science. So, and that master's thesis I did, I turned into a a kind of a general book, which was also a scientific book, but that was my first experience with that. But then as an early curator scientist, your institution expects you to publish in scientific journals and obtain research grants and do a variety of things that require you to specialize. And so my first few decades at the museum, I was focused on specific projects on fish development and on evolution of fishes. But in the last 10 years, as I said, my interest came back towards approaching these broader audiences. And so I started also working with, say, certain presses to produce books for a more general audience. So I produced a book on gems and gemstones, for example, highlighting the museum's gem and mineral collection. Then I published the Curators book about Curators, the one we're talking about today. I published another book on the fossil lake locality where I work, and called Snapshots from Deep Time. And then I published more recently, just this year, a book on the interdisciplinary approach of bringing evolutionary philosophy into the cultural sciences. I mean, I love these more general directions, and at a museum, that's the perfect place to do it, because museums encourage interdisciplinary work. They encourage you to work across the aisle with somebody who's not specifically in your field. So, for example, I mean, that was clear from the start, actually. My PhD was in biology, but I was hired by a geology department in the museum. And that allowed me to put a broader perspective on the evolution of fishes, because I understood both the fossil and the living fishes. Now I'm trying to do the same thing with cultures, to try and explain cultural diversity from the perspective of cladistics or evolutionary philosophy, looking at the relationships among cultures rather than the differences which separate them. And perhaps it's a good time to be doing something like that, given the state of the world today.
Great, thank you. 然后那
Sure.
刚才老师说，这个他其实在给所谓的大众啊，就是在这个他其实在之前在进行学术写作的时候，其实用的语言也是蛮有趣的啊，以及关于这个策展人的工作，它本质就是一个非常跨学科的工作，所以这种语言上面的转换可能对他来说就是一个顺其自然的事情，就是他可能现在更加转换，他之前本专业是学生物学的，然后后来给他调到了一个这个地质的这个部门，然后他现在的个人写作方向现在是尝试在把生物跟文化结合在一起啊，所以也请大家后续也可以期待一下格兰德博士的更多写作的内容。好，那我们非常感谢大家的问题，也要感谢兰斯格兰德博士还有2位译者老师做客佳作书局的直播间。那么，如果大家想要更多的去了解这本书的详细内容，欢迎大家点击下方的这个购物袋按钮买来看看这个策展人自然历史博物馆的幕后故事究竟是什么样子的。然后这里面还有更多的图片，在老师的 PPT 之外，也可以希望得到大家目光的注视那除此之外呢，佳作书局还有更多的新书分享比如说这个策展人讲座，今天的策展人讲座之后，还有摄影主题讲座、新知学者讲座以及工作坊等等系列的文化活动。非常希望您能够关注我们的公众号和视频号只需要点击左上方的这个白色的头像找到有一个蓝色的小字写着视频号佳作书局就可以关注我们，并且预约我们后续的所有讲座。我们近期下一个讲座是在下周1，也就是8月12号的晚上同样是这一套国博博物馆学艺从。我们是请到了这个第6册展览设计导论的这个作者菲利普休斯 （Philip Hughes） 来介绍展览的叙事和设计。那 Philip 本人呢是一个策展事务所的负责人，然后前后后也经手了上百个各种各样大大小小的策展项目。所以这本书里面包括他的另一本新书都是关于这个展览的策展的实操性的问题去展开的。那么如果有对这个实操问题非常感兴趣的书友，欢迎您点击我们下方的这个弹窗进行讲座的预约。好，那再次感谢几位老师，期待下周依然能够在直播间里与各位书友一起再看看这个国博一丛系列。好，大家再见，拜拜。
拜拜。
我们可以稍等。不知道大家有没有看过一部电影叫做《博物馆奇妙夜》？有没有幻想过在自然历史博物馆里面生活和工作？那这本策展人自然历史博物馆的幕后故事，就是芝加哥菲尔德自然历史博物馆 Field Museum 的策展人兰斯格兰德博士的亲身经历。他以平实易懂、不乏幽默的叙述方式，为读者认识和理解自然历史博物馆的收藏及其策展工作打开了一扇窗口。那菲尔德自然历史博物馆呢，是成立于1906年，是美国3大自然历史博物馆之一，也是世界上最大的自然历史博物馆之一，拥有超过2700万件标本。那从这个 DNA 到恐龙，整个涵盖的范围非常之广泛。其中的镇馆之宝，一条霸王龙苏，是一座座长13米、高4米的霸王龙化石，那也是世界上现存最大、最完整的恐龙化石。那在兰斯格兰德作为高级策展人领导博物馆的研究和收藏部门的时间里面，他逐渐意识到，好像鲜少有人了解自然历史博物馆策展人的工作内容，以及他们进行收藏，以研究和记录我们这个星球上面生物学、地质学以及人类文化的工作。那这一认识的差距呢，就成为了他写作这本书的初衷。那这本书在装帧上做了圆脊精装，制作的非常精细。书脊上面还做了这种植绒布的包被设计，不仅可以方便平摊，翻阅起来手感也非常的好。那大家还能看到这里的一个序号啊，这代表是中国国家博物馆国际博物馆学译丛的其中一本。那这一季的国博博物馆学译丛一共10种，是由中国国家博物馆，也就是国博，与东方出版中心合作出版，内容涉及博物馆学理论基础、展览策划与设计、管理运营、藏品管理与保护和博物馆数字化和公共教育等方面。策展人格兰德博士是由一个个人化的背景出发，从学生成长为高级策展人的学生经历讲起，分享自己在芝加哥 Field Museum 从事科研和策展的亲身经历，以及他在全世界进行探险的有趣故事。那么还有他对策展人在21世纪所扮演的角色，以及他日趋丰富的内涵进行的反思。比如说，从第1章到第3章讲述了引导格兰德选择策展人这个职业的缘起，穿插着呢还介绍了秩序分类法这一个科学方法，以及它在科学界当中的争议。那第4章到第8章中间这部分可能会频频的出现各种鱼类啊、河豚啊，还有霸王龙啊，以及这个彪悍的策展人的种种探险经历。比如说还会有这个智斗鳄鱼和毒蛇，那讲述了他在成长为策展人的道路上对格兰德博士产生了重要的影响的事件和同事。第9章和第10章讲述了标本采集、行政管理和展览策划等流程的幕后故事。那第11章到第13章呢，是探讨了策展人和自然历史博物馆工作当中出现的一些前瞻性的问题，比如说文物返还收藏伦理以及保管问题等等等等。那最后呢，第14章星空下的展望，我们该何去何从，则总结了这个自然历史博物馆所面临的挑战，以及策展人和博物馆该如何应对。这本书可能是这个系列译丛当中偏实践以及可读性和故事性都非常强的一本书。原中国国家博物馆馆长王春法 也是这套译丛的主编，在总序里面提到，博物馆学是一门综合学科。那相应的，这套译丛就想要去兼顾系统性、探索性和开放性，兼收并蓄地去分享世界博物馆学研究动态，也希望为咱们中国自己的博物馆学学科系统奠定基础。大家可以持续关注这套译丛的系列策展人讲座，也欢迎感兴趣的书友点击下方的红色购物袋了解购买。针对这套译丛，我们已经邀请到了其中4场的原作者，比如说今天的嘉宾 Field Museum 的策展人兰斯 Grande。接下来8月12号也是这套国博博物馆学译丛的第6本展览设计导论。那这本书的作者 Philip 菲利普休斯也要做客佳作书局的直播间，介绍展览的叙事与设计，以及间歇性的穿插他前后经手了的上百个策展项目。那如果有对策展实践和非常实操性的问题感兴趣的书友，欢迎大家点击下方的弹窗预约。不知道大家